Well, what do you know? I'm back again already, here to share with you a challenge I faced on my last major project where I had to find an effective way to rank and sort rows within pre-specified categories. Mouthful. Uh, by which I mean, basically, say you have a table which has all of the names, stats, and specifically the run times for all competitors in all races for a given track meet. Then let's say you want to add a column which ranks the racers' times. Now obviously you're going to want a first, second, third, so on place for each of the races, which unfortunately presents a problem because although Microsoft Excel currently has not one but three rank functions, as far as I know, none of them can be written to act as a sort of rank if without possibly the use of array formulas that I don't want to get into right now or pretty much ever, which means we are going to have to get a little creative here. Now, in my case, I wasn't actually dealing with athletes. Instead, I was dealing with trays flowing through a production process broken into stations, which spans several departments. And although I wasn't dealing with racers, I still was very interested in their times. Namely, how long had each tray been stuck or stalled in a given station. And more specifically, my assignment was to create custom top 25 lists for each department, the most stalled trays. And to do that, I basically had this table, or more specifically, I had the blue columns of this table, and then I would add the other columns later. What we have here is the tray number, which was the unique identifier, the station, which in actuality wasn't a convenient number. Instead, it was the actual name of the station, so things were in alphabetical order as opposed to a convenient chronological order. The days late, which is not to be confused with days stalled. A tray could be late even when it is currently moving very quickly through the process. Obviously, it would probably mean that it had stalled earlier and now was moving faster, which led to a sort of tug of war between what are we most concerned about, trays that are currently stuck or trays that are late. Where do we focus our attention to first? Short answer, both of them. For this particular assignment, we wanted to focus on days stalled, or time stalled, actually. Breaks, basically translated to how many times has a particular tray needed to be restarted due to quality issues. The bin number was a interesting piece of data, which I won't go into too much information, except it did present an interesting challenge for one of the departments where I was specifically instructed that for the finish department, we do not want to worry about, say, the 200 bin trays for finish. So not only do I have to rank these by department, but while I'm ranking these by department, I have to be mindful of the 200 bin finishes. Or something like that. I hope that makes sense. The scan date was the day that the tray was scanned to its current station, which was actually housed separate from the scan time, which was of course the time that it was scanned to a particular station. This column does not have any time information associated with it, and this column has no date associated with it. So if we went ahead and just real quickly changed it to date, it's assuming that we're talking about the 1900s is Excel's default. So we have that. Now, before I go in too much detail as to what I added to this table, I just wanted to demonstrate a simplified version of what my predecessors would do in order to create these lists. First, they would use their internal knowledge or a separate sheet of paper that told them this. Station 1 and Station 2 are pre-surface. Station 3 through 7 are surface. Keep in mind, these weren't numerical values. These were names of stations. So this was all over the place because it was listed alphabetically, of course. So let's say we wanted to create the top 25 list for finish, which is stations 17 through 20. They would go to the station column. This was already a table. Filter out everything. Find the stations in question, which was considerably harder than what I'm doing right now because it was in alphabetical order and all over the place. And sometimes you would miss one, or sometimes you would click on too many boxes. But if you did it correctly, you should end up with all of the finish columns. But look, we still have the 200s. So next they would go to the bin number column and scroll down to the 200s, and one by one click on each of the 200 boxes, which there isn't 200 of these, but there are a lot of them, and it was very time consuming, and you would have to do all of this multiple times for each one of the departments. Now the first thing I would suggest, if you were going to use this method, and then after they did that, they would then go to the scan date and sort it through oldest to newest. Give it a second. From there, they could click and drag to the 25 count, copy the necessary data, and print that out for each one of the department lead. This was very time consuming, especially for finish. And the very first suggestion I notified them was, instead of using these individual checkboxes, there fortunately is this text filters option. Go to begins with, show rows where bin number actually we want does not begin with a 2. There we've quickly removed all the 200 bins for finish. It's perfect. But now, one problem, we only sorted by scan date, but as you can see, we have more than 25 for finish that are not 200 bin that all were scanned on the same day. So sorting it isn't really doing anything. That is why it is important to combine these two columns together, which is actually very simple. All you have to do is this plus this. And that's how you get this. That's how they did it, and it works for them, and I'm pretty sure they still do it to this day. My method was first to figure out the departments, which I used a simple VLOOKUP and an index table that I created. That was an easy win for this column. I just showed you how I got this column. Days stalled was a simple formula of a round down of the current date time minus the scan date time, rounded 2 decimal places, rounded down to 2 decimal places. Now, if you didn't want to deal with this text filter option, alternatively, you could create a separate column that I always call left1 or L1, which just uses the left function and looks at the first character of a given column or cell. If I wanted the first 2, then I would change this one to a 2. Now, the next column was a sort of, should I bother counting this row? Which for this simple situation, I'm only worried about if it's the finish department, is it associated with a 200 bin? So if and the department equals finish and left1 equals 2, then 0. Otherwise, 1. Okay, that gives me this, and you can see most of these are ones, except for these zeros, which are associated with finish in 200s. Which finally brings us to the most important column, and the column why we are basically here today to discuss, the categorized rank column. And it's a little difficult to explain, but I'll do my best. First thing that we're doing here is we're saying if this count column is a 0, then just go ahead and give me 9,999,999. No chance that those will ever wind up in my top 25 lists. If it's a 1, then we are going to use the SUMIF function. With the SUMIF function, the first portion is the range that we want evaluated, and then the criteria that range is going to evaluate, followed by the actual numbers we want to sum. And it doesn't make a lot of sense in this first column, so I'm going to actually skip down to this row so it makes a little bit more sense. Hopefully this is still the same. We are dealing with ship, and that's a 1, so we don't have to worry about that part. What I am doing is I am asking it to look for whatever's in M5, the second argument, which is kind of confusing. Look for ship in the range starting from the very top, M2, down to M5, which is the row that I'm currently in. So the top is permanently locked down with $2 signs, and the bottom part of the range is only locked down with the letter. If you do find a match, say ship, then go ahead and sum all of the numbers within the range in Q2 to Q5. So from the very top to whatever row we're in. And by doing that, you get this. So this is the first time that dip appears in this column. This is the first time ship appears. This is the first time uncut. Now this is the second time that ship appears, starting from the top going down. And then this is the first time finish shows up, but it's a 200 bin, so we're not going to count it. First time other, first time pre-surface, second time other, so on and so forth. Now we're at the first qualifying finish, and then the second. Can't count this third. We have to wait until we get here, and so on. Now, for this ranking function to actually work in the sense where we're actually ranking by their scan date, we have to make sure to actually sort it by the scan date time. So let's scan this to oldest to newest now, as to whatever arrangement it was in before. I tried really hard to start out with a random arrangement. Now this function probably might be a little time consuming for it to run. This can take a couple minutes. Don't worry, it will work eventually. Just notice how that sorting did take a little bit of time. So that's to be expected because it's doing a lot of work here. Okay, but now we are good. This is the absolute most stalled tray. Everything's good here, so we're great. So the next step would